magnitude
Okay,
budgets,
back
right? There,
again
and a
one
rough
last
order of
time this
magnitude
week
budget is
with cost
accurate
estimation,
to
which frankly
minus
is a process
25% to
of
plus
forecasting the
75%
cost
of your
with the defined scope
actual
to match
cost,
the
what
schedule,
it will be. But
right?
it's a
The
good
iron
starting
triangle,
point,
keeping it
right?
always in
That's still a
balance.
pretty wide range,
So,
yes. And we are
cost
working
estimation
towards a
sometimes is defined as
definitive
the
budget,
summation of
which by the end of
individual cost
planning
elements
should end up
using
minus
established
5% to
methods
plus
and
10%.
valid
That's
data
a definitive
to establish
budget.
future
And that's what we're working
costs
to, but we
of
got
a
to start somewhere.
program
Historical
based
records
on what is
are
known
a
today,
great
right?
place
But the
to
PMBOK
be.
guide,
And
if
then,
you
of
use
course,
that as a
interview
resource,
and talk to other
it's
people,
going to
your
define
team members,
cost estimation
people in
process
finance,
as
people that have done the project
the
before,
process
a great
of
way to get the
developing
information.
an approximation
Now,
of
continuing
the
with
cost
that same
of
theme
resources
about how
needed
to
to complete
estimate,
the project work,
because it is
right?
difficult,
Keep
right?
in mind that we want to measure
multiple
direct
people
costs
have some
and
control
indirect
over the
costs, for
budget,
example.
right? Make
Direct
sure they're
costs, I think we've
incorporated.
discussed
Maybe
this,
set
but
up
those are costs
a round
directly
table of
attributable
those people,
to the
right?
project itself,
And
like
that there is more
direct
flexibility
labor
regarding
and raw
the
materials and
estimates
equipment,
of the inputs,
rental
right?
costs.
So
Indirect
we want
costs,
to assess,
on the other hand,
the material
are
and
costs
labor
that
costs,
cannot
right?
be
Do I
directly
need
attributed
all
to the specific
level
project,
one project
like
managers,
management
say that's the highest
or
level,
general
or can I have
administration
one level
or
one to manage
other
three
costs like
level
that,
three
right?
and
So
one
on the
level
surface,
four
this process
project
looks
manager,
difficult,
right? That
but
adds a little
you have several
flexibility into
techniques
your
to
budget
accomplish
if
this
those
task
are
and
the
lots
skill
of
sets
great
required to
personnel
get
that
the
you
job
can lean
done.
on to do the work for
And of
you.
course, the accounting system
and once you understand
has
them,
to be
you can
set up to
estimate
track the data I
project
mentioned. Again,
costs,
control
frankly,
accounts,
pretty
which are
easily,
part of
right?
your
It
work
is an
breakdown
estimation.
structure.
Now, this is a list
And,
of multiple
usage
ways
of labor
that you
material
can
be very
costs,
lumpy over time,
right? And some
or
we've already
bulk.
talked
So what
about.
I like to do is
because there's similar estimation
resource
techniques are used
histogram.
in
So I
schedule
can
management.
a histogram is just a bar
Analogous,
chart, right?
which is
And
by
a resource
analogy, right?
histogram
Find something on the
lets
shelf.
me
Historical
see where these
information,
bumpy
like
patterns
organizational
are
process
at
assets.
with my
Parametric
resources. And maybe I
estimating.
can
This
smooth
uses
it out,
historical
smooth it out,
data,
level it out.
right?
You want to be
And
careful of the
it's
schedule's critical path, that you don't
statistical
level
nature
over
or
a critical path
mathematical.
item
It's also
and make
a
it
heuristic,
more
right? It's a rule of thumb, like
problematic in your
price per
schedule.
square foot
But otherwise,
of your home.
you'd use
We
that
could do
resource
bottom-up
histogram to
estimating
try
to
and
do the
level things
exact
out and
estimating
make it
from
more
the bottom
consistent.
and aggregate
Now,
those costs up through the
continuing
control
with
accounts
this
of your work breakdown
degree
structure.
of
We could also
accuracy and
use
complexity,
PERT,
right? What
which is
makes
3-point
estimating
estimating. Remember, we
difficult?
take the
So I'm
optimistic
going to go a little
plus the most
deeper,
likely cost plus
into
the
the different
pessimistic
types
cost
of cost
and
estimating
divide it
techniques
by
for a few
3.
minutes,
That's
right?
3-point
But
estimating.
first,
PERT
remember the
is
diagram
similar.
we started
It's
with.
the
That
optimistic
what's
cost
going on
plus
here? Well, this
the
graphic
pessimistic
shows
cost
that once we
plus
think
4
through
times
the
the
cost
most likely
estimating
cost,
process,
it weights
it's
the
not
most likely
all,
by a factor of 4.
that,
you divide that
complicated
by 6.
and does not have.
We did
and this
discuss
has,
reserve
frankly,
analysis,
to me, a very reasonable
which are buffers,
flow, right?
Not padding,
so we can put
buffers
together our
against
plan.
delays.
We can
and
define our
that came in 2
baselines,
forms,
which are only 3. There's cost
and,
baseline,
management reserve.
schedule baseline, and
the
scope
cost
baseline.
of
That's
quality,
that iron triangle
right,
we want to measure.
Has to be
and we,
assessed,
so we'll,
right?
with that,
How
we'll
much
identify the
quality
cost
do you
drivers,
want to build into
do our
your
analysis,
project.
and look
If
at
it's the
cost
space
as an
shuttle,
independent
you want
variable,
to have cost to
right?
build in
And
a
we'll
lot of
flow
cost
this
quality
information
beyond
into our earned
Six
value
Sigma,
management
for
system
example,
that we're
or,
going to use,
6
where we
standard
can track the
deviations
actual
from the normal.
data
But
to
if
what we
it's,
project
dollar
to do, right?
store
Always comparing
toy,
in control,
right,
the control process,
that would be
the
overkill,
planned
and it would
cost
cost too
versus
much
the
money, right?
actual cost.
You can also use
so I think you
software
could
to
use
help
this
estimate
diagram
costs.
as a
You
starting
could
point
go get
just
vendor
to
bids,
smooth
requests
out
for
this degree
information,
of
and get vendor
difficulty that
bids,
we have
perhaps.
started with. Okay.
And you could do
I'm going
some
to stop
sort of
there.
group
We'll come back with the
decision-making
types
approach. All
of
great
budgeting next.
approaches. There are problems, of course, no matter what, that we want to be aware of. So problems with estimating, right, for sure. Here's a golden rule. The person doing the estimates should be the one running the activity, right? So you will also, as the PM, want to make sure they provide you the basis for their estimates. That's a great term, basis for estimates, right? If the one doing the work is the one giving you the estimate and giving you the basis for the estimate, a narrative description of how they came to this conclusion, then there is an opportunity for important accountability, right? So if a firm adds money for estimating issues, We talked about this. This is really management reserves, right? And we do not add money to estimates, right? That's called padding, and padding is always bad. We just don't pad in project management. It's about control, okay? Sometimes it's right, not always about the profit. Your company will certainly, we talked about this in weeks 1 and week 2, develop a strategy, and you should know the company's strategy. And oftentimes success for your project is the iron triangle. Most times that is a key measure of success, but also, are you supporting or enhancing or building on the company's strategic approach and their roadmap, right? So your very project is an implementation of the corporate strategy. So that's another reason to know it. And it's also a measure of our success, right? Things we can do. Does the company want to get their foot in the door? Do they want to develop a technology that maybe your project failed, but it did develop the technology, right? Did it improve your competitive position, etc.? So we can use the project bids and requests for proposals, or RFPs. Generally, it's a procurement term, but so the term procurement strategy, it refers to this long-term plan to cost effectively acquire the necessary supplies in that make or buy decision that you did as the project manager, right? Where we get a list of efficient vendors who will deliver quality goods on time, abiding by our purchase terms, right? So just as you'd expect to have a corporate procurement strategy for a request for proposal, you would expect to apply these principles to the project and have a strategy that supported the corporate strategic direction. So I usually need at least 2 weeks for planning to develop a project proposal, including to collect requirements and determine estimates. In that time period, I'm having part of my team collect on paper formal estimates from vendors, right, and comparing them. So there are also then some questions to consider in this approach. What should a project bid on? What should a project bid on is more of a question that describes, that's what the C-suite's effort is to build the business documents, right? So what should the project build on? The C-suite is managing that question, because when they give you the business documents, like the business case, that, as you recall, defines the business need, and that's what they do. They define the business need. So it answers that question, the business need, and that's what your project is implementing. Why do we need this? Okay, so by using the feasibility study and a comparison analysis that we that's funny, that we talked about previously, return on investment, as you recall, IRR, or internal rate of return, payback period, we talked about opportunity cost, net present value, future value, those just to name a few, right? So like procurement, I'd ask the company PMO for a weighted matrix so that I can assess the project criteria, and then I will write to that criteria itself, okay? So procurement preparation for an RFP, a request for proposal, can easily cost the business $10,000 to $15,000 in man hours alone. And so most of these proposals aren't won. So consider that when you're preparing your project proposal. It costs money. Use the time wisely. Now, there are some project proposal contents. I would ask you to refer to the business case primer we saw in week 1. I had it listed there as an example. And that'll provide a good comparison of what makes a proposal outline, right? These items are very much in line with the procurement requirements. So there's really synergy between your project proposal contents and your business case proposal contents and your procurement proposals that you will build in an RFP or RFQ. There's a lot of synergy there, including some of these same things. they say past performance is one of the best indicators of future success. Same with hiring. When you hire somebody, you call their references largely because that's the best indicator of performance in their next role. There are learning curves here. So human performance usually improves when a task is repeated. We all learn things and get better at it over time. And this actually happens by a fixed percent each time, leading to a production doubling, right? And this kind of percentage is called the learning rate. So we have to say to ourselves, what's the learning rate? A traditional default value for the learning rate is sometimes used as 0.1 or 10%. And this may represent a good starting point. If your learning rate is set too high, the training will progress very slowly as you are making your deliverable, right? With very tiny updates to the weights in your network. However, if learning rate is too high, the other one was too low. If the learning rate is too high, it can cause divergent behavior in your loss of functions, right? So you want to be careful. A common learning curve, a starting point I said was 0.1 or 10%. A common learning curve that the cumulative average time to complete a manual task which involves learning, it will decrease by 20% whenever volume doubles, right? So if I double volume, learning will change by 20%. So if the first website took 100 hours to build, then after the second website, the cumulative average time will be 80 hours, right? A reduction of 20% rather than 100 hours is what we could expect. I think is pretty reasonable. And so that's something you'll want to add into your equation. Here's a picture of it. A learning curve then is the concept that graphically depicts this relationship between cost and output over a defined period of time. Normally to represent a repetitive task, as I mentioned, between an employer and a worker. So in a colloquial usage, a steep learning curve means the knowledge in question takes longer to learn, and a shallow learning curve means it's frankly a very quick process. There's a learning curve calculation addressed in the literature. And here's a picture then of tech shock. Okay, we want to be aware of tech shock. Tech shock are sudden changes in technology that significantly affect the economic, social, political, or some other outcome, right? So new systems may promise efficiency, but it may take time to realize that efficiency. So an example of the function here where Y is the output, L along the bottom is the labor, and the MPL is the marginal product of that labor. Okay, so normally reference is made to positive, right, technological changes, though technology shocks can also be contractionary or negative, right? So the term shock really connotes the fact that the technological progress is not always gradual. There can be large-scale discontinuous changes that significantly affect the product. So we want to make tech shock a positive for efficiency, not a negative. Okay, and of course we could want to consider other factors in our budgeting process: escalation, waste, and bad luck. Of all the bad luck, we are out of time for this week's lectures. I thank you guys very much. I look forward to seeing you online. Don't forget I have open office hours if you need to contact me, and I'm always available by email.